Hey friends, I'm Brandy Gable. Thank you for joining me on the road home to you. Here we offer hope and faith in Jesus to those who have been wounded by others, caught up in addiction, or afflicted by the storms of life. Every week I sit down with someone who's traveled those long, hard roads and met Jesus along the way. I invite you to join me as I talk with real people about real issues that really matter. Hey friends, welcome to the road home to you. I am Brandy Gable.
And I'm Matt Gable.
What? It's Matt and Brandy in the studio again?
I know, it's been a long time.
It feels like about forever.
Yeah, maybe a couple of forevers.
At least a few forevers.
Right.
Matt, hello.
Hello.
How are you?
You know, I'm tired.
Yeah, we're recording this in the evening times after dinner.
Mm-hmm.
So we have that nice after dinner.
Yeah.
Really full, just want to sit down, watch TV, and then go to bed effect happening.
Right.
But
right. We have to fight it.
Must fight.
Stay
through.
strong.
Take one for the team.
Exactly.
So we're here in the studio, and this is the beginning of season 4.
Wow.
For the road home to you.
Yes.
Now, here's the funny thing that maybe our listeners have keyed in on, or maybe they haven't even noticed, but our seasons have no rhyme or reason.
No, they don't. Although, I mean, they are punctuated by breaks, you know, at least for a while, we were kind of trying to do something of a theme, I guess, in chunks, but...
Yeah, that didn't really last too long.
No, it didn't.
But yeah, usually it is kind of punctuated by some breaks with time off or whatever around holidays, it seems. Summer, right. Christmas, that kind of thing. This time, it was also kind of punctuated with the whole changing of the year. But part of that, of course, has been because we were doing a little bit of changing of the podcast.
Yeah.
So to speak.
You've been doing a lot of brainstorming and just trying to really figure out what God was putting on your heart and where you felt God wanted you to take this.
Right. So here's the thing, friends. If you are new to this show, you might be going, what is the road home to you? And why in the world do I want to listen to it? And I'm here to tell you why and what. The road home to you, we started off really just kind of talking about just general ideas of Christian living and kind of what that looks like as we're trying to follow Christ in this world between the cross and the crown, and that kind of that tension that we all feel as Christ followers. So we started off kind of with that as our primary focus. And then as we've progressed, a couple of things have happened. One, we sort of realized that scheduling-wise, it wasn't working super great for you and I to come together in the studio and talk about things quite as often as we wanted.
And you wouldn't think that would be so hard. I mean, we do live together.
We do.
And we do any number of things together. And yet, scheduling time for the both of us to just set aside so that we can come in here and quiet our brains from everything else and get this done was getting increasingly difficult.
Yeah. Our commitments and responsibilities have sort of increased in a lot of different capacities, and it was just getting too hard.
Right.
So I started kind of transitioning to interviewing more and more people, and a couple of things happened in that I had an opportunity to speak to people whose life experiences are so vastly different from my own, or the paths that they've walked are different from my own. And I've had the opportunity to hear their stories and to hear how God has met them in their hour of need and in their greatest pain. And so I talked to Steve Austin, who was a pastor who attempted to take his life by suicide. I talked to Crystalline, who walked through 2 marriages with domestic abuse. I talked to my
Mhm.
sister-in-law who went through a very long road to getting to being a mom and holding 2 babies in her arms. And um, and just a variety of people that kind of opened my eyes up to the fact that there is a whole world of pain out there that I don't really know a whole lot about. I've had my own share of pain. You've had your share
Mhm.
of pain. I know our friends listening have experienced their own pain. And what I'm coming to realize is as I interact with people online and, person to person, I'm realizing that our levels of anxiety and depression are just ticking up. And the experiences that we're going through are really affecting us more and more, it seems, or we're talking about it more and more.
Mhm.
And a lot of people have really been brave in kind of pulling back the curtain a little bit and saying, this is the real me. This is the pain that I've endured. This is what I've gone through, whether it's sexual abuse or child abuse or um, addiction or, any,
Yeah,
any
and that
multitude of things.
process is ongoing in the secular world, in the media and social media, but it is kind of only just getting started in the church, it seems. Well, I mean, it has been going for a while in the church, but it's only seems like it's gaining momentum fairly recently.
Yeah, it seems like people are finally starting to respond to those of us who for years have been saying, hey, I'm not okay. I'm broken. I'm a mess. And I desperately need Jesus. And we've taken off the mask and we've said, this is me, real, raw, vulnerable. And what that does oftentimes, it seems in the church, is it scares people. It makes them kind of draw back and go, I don't want to come face to face with this kind of mess in my life. We're Christians. We're supposed to look good, put on a good face for Jesus.
Hmm.
And there've been some of us that have just said, I can't do that anymore. And it seems like finally people are starting to go, now that you mention it, I have some pain too. Maybe I should
Yeah.
talk about that as well.
Well, and I think there's also some legitimate scriptural concerns, that get raised when you start talking about Christians being mentally unhealthy. Because, there's any number of scriptures that will talk about, the work that the Holy Spirit does, that Christ does when you become a follower of Jesus. And so you don't want to admit to continuing to struggle with your mental health if you're a Christ follower.
Right.
Because, there's any number of scriptures that would imply that that shouldn't happen,
Right.
that you
Right.
should be just fine. Jesus has come into your life and he's healed you, and you shouldn't have those problems.
Right. And yet we all know we still got problems.
Yes.
Whether we admit that to the world or not, they're still there and we know that.
Yeah.
So in having these conversations and in kind of reflecting on my own story and our story and the recovery work that has happened in my life over the past 10 years, and just really kind of praying about, God, what direction do you want this podcast to go? Because I feel like I should be continuing, but I don't know that I'm going the right direction.
Hmm.
Um, it just kind of became a burden on my heart that I really wanted to talk about Christian living in the context of our mental health. What does it mean to be a person of faith who struggles with depression and anxiety and abuse and addiction and codependency and all of these big, big things that we all
Hmm.
deal with?
Yeah.
And you're right. The Bible does say we're a new creation, but just because Jesus has come in and the Holy Spirit has set me free from the bondage of sin, and I have eternal glory with God to look forward to, it doesn't mean that life doesn't still affect me here.
Hmm.
And we need to talk about that. It's vitally important that we talk about that. one, for our own well-being, and two, I think so that we can be a greater light to the world around us to say, look, it's not that we're hypocrites. It's just that we're just as screwed up as you are. And
Right.
and we're looking to the Savior for answers.
Yeah, there's so many people out there that are looking for authenticity, that
Yeah.
just want people to be real.
Mm-hmm.
They're okay with the flaws and the faults that people have, as long as you're not trying to hide it. As long as, you can come out and say, okay, this is really who I am. And these are the things I've struggled with, but these are also the things that Christ has brought me through. I'm not there yet. I haven't arrived, but God has done some amazing things in me or through me or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's going to be our focus, friends. That's going to be the focus. That's why you should be listening to this show, why you should tell all of your friends to be listening to, because we're going to talk about real things that real people are dealing with, and we're going to be honest about it. And we're going to talk about the highs and the lows, and we're going to talk about some potentially controversial things. We're going to talk about some potentially triggering things, and it's not to be gratuitous or to glorify the trauma or anything like that, but it's to shed light on the trauma. One of my biggest things that I'm so passionate about is, we're fighting all of these emotional monsters. And just like, in Lord of the Rings, as the guys are going through their journey, as they're facing different foes, they have to know who their enemy is, what the monsters are that they're fighting, so that they know how to actually defeat the monster. You have to name your monster.
Mm-hmm.
And so my big thing when it comes to mental health is, I don't want to hide and cower behind closed doors and just be like, oh, I don't have any problems. Everything's great. I want to talk about, I struggle with codependency. Let's talk about that. Because if I know what codependency looks like, then I know what tools I can use to counter codependency.
Mm-hmm.
If I know what an anxiety attack looks like and what I struggle with that causes anxiety, then I know how to better equip myself to prevent that anxiety attack or whatever. So we're going to name monsters. We're going to get real about it. And again, because of scheduling conflicts, a good chunk of the time I'm going to be interviewing other people. Now, I haven't talked to you about this part yet.
Mm-hmm.
So this is new for you.
Okay.
But I was thinking, like, every month you and I can do a check-in with each other.
Yeah.
Like, once a month, you and I will sit down in the studio and have a conversation.
We ought to be able to manage that, I would hope.
It sure seems like we should.
I know.
I don't know, though. So that's what I was hoping. Once a month, you and I can sit down, and then the other weeks of the month, it's going to be an interview with a guest who is either an expert in their field or an author or a fellow podcaster or just a regular Joe who has walked down some hard paths and met Jesus along the way. So friends, if you are listening and you're thinking, hey, I'm an expert or an author or a fellow podcaster or a regular Joe who has walked some hard paths, and you would like to share your story, please email me at roadhometoyou@gmail.com and share your story with me. And let's talk about getting you on as a guest.
That would be fun.
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
So while we're doing this kind of relaunch episode, season 4, bells and whistles, there's no bells, there's no whistles. But while we're doing this episode, I thought let's talk a little bit about recovery, because you and I started in the fall. We each started facilitating a Genesis Process for Change group within our church.
Yes.
I'm leading the women, you're leading the men. It's worked out really weird where it's all couples.
Yeah. That was, we've talked about this before, but yeah, it was just so interesting to see how God worked all that out and to see it all come together. And, I don't have the experience with the Genesis process that you do. And so there's really only so many groups that really would have worked for me to be able to lead because, I don't have that experience. And the makeup of this group was just fantastic.
Mm.
It happened to be couples that had already, gone through a fair amount of experience in life as well as in their faith. And so to a certain extent, they can kind of be self-directed a little bit. So while it's not ideal, I've been able to kind of step back a little bit, concentrate on my own work in the Genesis process, and just have to trust that the other men in the group are staying on top of it, are staying in touch with the Holy Spirit, and looking for His work in their lives and being responsive to that.
Yeah, and it's been really interesting because if you're not aware, if this is your first episode listening, and you're not aware of what the Genesis process for change is, we are not being sponsored by them in any way. But it was a program that was written by Michael Dye, who has worked with addicts primarily for quite a lot of years, and over time developed this program specifically to work with those that were drug addicted and alcohol addicted and in prostitution and, fairly big, I would say, kind of major
Right.
things going on in their lives. People that it's easy to look at and say, well, boy, their life is kind of in shambles for one reason or another.
Mm-hmm.
And over time, he started to see a need because as Christians, we still have those same, we still have addiction.
Right.
It just comes out differently. We might be addicted to anxiety. We might be addicted to religious control. We might be addicted to work, things that are kind of quote unquote socially acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you talk to Christians who allegedly have it all together and think that they have it all together? How do you talk to them about their addictions and how to break those addictions? It's kind of based off of Paul's, I can't remember what, is it Romans? I can't remember where it's
I
located.
I think it is Romans where he says something to the effect of the things that I don't want to do or the sin that I don't want to do, I find myself doing. And the good that I want to do, I end up not doing.
Yeah, exactly.
That's sort of a paraphrase, but that's a general idea.
It's a good paraphrase. And we all have that. How many times do we look around and we go, man, I'd love to just start a habit or a routine of, exercising 30 minutes a day.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like the hardest thing in the world. Well, for me anyway, to do. But I have absolutely no problem, doing 500 destructive things or things that at least aren't beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
And, but, wanting to do it and actually doing it are very different things. But it's so easy to slide back into those bad habits
Mm-hmm.
that are just counter to everything that God has for us. So,
yeah. And you find out, you wonder, where on earth is this coming from? I want to get rid of this, and yet it still keeps hanging around. And the Genesis process does a really good job of helping people really dig deep into their lives and holds up to a mirror to the dark places in our lives that we really don't want to look at. And in fact, you find that your subconscious mind works really hard at keeping those things hidden.
yeah. In fact, it's kind of funny because this is now my second time going through this process. And I'm finding myself, I've noticed this a couple of times, we'll hit a chapter or a section of a chapter that is going to be working on a thing that apparently my subconscious knows very well I need to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, I find myself like kind of even physically pushing away from my book. Like, nope, I don't want to go there. Thank you very much. Just going to close that and be done with it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm like, no, wait a minute. I can't do that. I'm the facilitator. Like I have to be able to speak on this. And if I'm going to hold the women in my group accountable, then I have to, I have to show up too.
Yeah.
And, but it's very funny because it's very, very much that subconscious response of, no, I don't think I want to deal with it.
All of a sudden, the dishes become very urgent.
Right. And I hate doing dishes,
Right.
but I'd rather do anything but this. So it's a fantastic program, and I so highly recommend it. One of the things that it goes into quite a lot is our limbic system, and that's where all of our earliest memories are stored. And so like when we first experience a thing, that memory gets stored in the limbic system, and it remembers pain and pleasure and fear and all of those things. And that is oftentimes what is kind of driving our current behavior, even well into our adult lives.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why you can talk to somebody who maybe went through the most traumatic childhood, and you're just thinking, how in the world are you even standing upright? And then you'll talk to somebody else who didn't really go through anything bad,
Mm-hmm.
like their cat died when they were 3. And that's really kind of the worst thing that happened to them as a child. But it's like they're a complete mess of a person. And you kind of look at their story and go, what the heck happened there? And it's because the way our limbic systems have responded and held on to those experiences has kind of shaped how we're responding now into our adult life. And unless we deal with our past, it's going to continue to keep creeping in to our present and our future.
Yeah, one of the things that that Michael Dye mentions several times in the book is counter to the kind of old wives' tale or the cliche that you always hear that time heals all wounds. But no, it really doesn't. I mean, over a given amount of time, you might forget some of the details or whatever of that initial incident, but the behavioral programming that gets set up by the limbic system does not go away, and it does not heal unless you specifically address it and unless you work hard to counter those habits and patterns that get set up.
Yeah. It's really interesting. And so we go into a lot of that kind of stuff, and it's hard work. Would you say it's been kind of hard work?
Oh, absolutely. You really have to delve into things that you don't want to admit to yourself, let alone admit to other people. And that's one of the keys to making the Genesis process work is sharing things in a group.
Mm-hmm.
So one, you have to have a group that you feel safe and comfortable in. But 2, you have to be willing to take that step and to be bold and go out on a limb, exercise some faith, take a risk, and share things that you really don't want to talk about.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk a little bit because I think one of the things that has traditionally been the case. Now, you and I are both Gen Xers, so we were born in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And I know one of the things that for us growing up was kind of this macho, men don't cry, men don't talk about their feelings, that sissy stuff, kind of that
Right.
tough guy mentality was pretty prevalent in our upbringing, I would say.
It was, and it's not exclusive to our generation.
No.
To a certain extent, it's built into American culture in general.
Mm-hmm.
Especially I think out in the West, that pioneering, I'm going to head west on my own, start a homestead, and,
Yeah. Pull myself up by the bootstraps.
there you go. That whole,
Rattlesnake bites don't bother me.
yeah, the mythos of the Western U.S.
Yeah.
And you would think that, okay, it's it's a couple hundred years after all of that, but boy, it's not all that long ago. And those attitudes, thought patterns, things like that, they get passed down from generation to generation.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's faded a little bit, but it's still there.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit because in your guys' group, you have 2 Gen Xers
Mm-hmm.
and 2 baby boomers.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about what does it look like for men to come together in this room and to sit down and talk about your childhood wounds and the current struggles you're dealing with, whether that is anger or pornography or fantasizing or some kind of addiction to prescription pills or work or whatever. What does it look like for a group of 4 men to come together and just be open and vulnerable? How's that going?
Well, it is not easy because there's a tendency, especially in a Christian group, that, you really don't want anybody else to see those broken places in your life. We have to do ministry side by side together.
Mm-hmm.
And to a certain extent, you just as soon not know the skeletons in the closet. And you certainly don't want anyone to know yours. So, it gets, if you're not careful, it becomes real easy to allow things to stay at a surface level.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where it's not ideal for me to be going through it while I'm trying to lead it. If I had already been through it and I was just trying to concentrate on leading it, it would be easier to hold that group accountable and not let that happen so much. But where I'm going through it as well, I have my own inner voice to struggle with that doesn't want me to disclose these things. And so that just makes it that much easier to allow things to kind of stay on that surface level.
Yeah.
But so I wouldn't say that our results out of this Genesis group are going to be fantastic. And I don't know that it's going to accurately represent the best of what can be accomplished through the Genesis process. However, there has been a lot of progress, and it's really been pretty cool to see what the Holy Spirit is working in people's lives through this process, and to see change and learning and growth happening, through this whole experience.
It's interesting because as you're talking about, having to minister side by side with these guys, I'm finding the same thing to be a little bit of an issue even for us women. Because my first time going through Genesis was at a different church. I was a taker at that church. I wasn't ministering to other people. Like I wasn't in any kind of lay leadership. I wasn't staff, anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
I was just a consumer of the services rendered at this church.
Right.
And, it was very easy to share with these women and to just lay it all out. And now we're at a smaller church, a considerably smaller church,
Mm-hmm.
and I am in a position of leadership, and I see these women every single Sunday, and we run into each other at the library and at the grocery store. And it's very different, because there is a part of me too that suddenly I'm finding myself wanting to put my best foot forward, and like I want these women to respect me as a quote unquote leader.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had a couple of times now where they're like, "Well, no, Brandy, we want to know what's going on with you. Where are you at?"
Mm-hmm.
And I've really appreciated that, because what it has said to me, and what their actions have said to me, is, we respect the position that you're in, but we want to know the real you.
Mm-hmm.
And as we get to know the real you, we'll continue to respect the position that you're in. We just know how to pray for you better now.
Right.
And now we know how to challenge you to push in and push closer towards God. So it's been very encouraging, but I do find myself kind of wanting to like be stoic and like, I've got it all figured out. I know all the answers. And then there's any number of times where I'm like, oh, girl, I don't know anything.
It's so ingrained and so habitual for longtime church members to just automatically put on the church mask.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's what you have to fight against so hard in that, search for authenticity and disclosing what is really going on, and digging out the dark, damaged places in our lives. You can't wear the church mask while you do that.
Yeah. It was interesting today. One of the women in our group, because we met this morning, even said one of the things that they appreciate so much about our church, because like I said, we all go to the same church.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that they appreciate is how our pastor will often just be, pretty transparent with like, hey, I struggle with this.
Mm-hmm.
And they've said how refreshing that was, and almost startlingly so, but how that kind of gave them then permission to say, things aren't perfect. Yeah, that's totally true. And now we can talk about it. So I think having people that are willing to kind of break down that
Mm-hmm.
wall is really important for other people to say, oh, I don't have to put a mask on. I can actually just be myself in front of you, because you're kind of a mess of a person too. And it's okay.
I tend to refer to it in Cold War terms as the mutually assured destruction syndrome,
Yeah.
Because that's what it is. As soon as one person lets their guard down and becomes vulnerable, then you go, oh, it's okay for me to do that too. Because if he or she feels safe disclosing that, and they give me that sort of ammunition to work with, okay, well then I guess I can let people see what's going on in my life. And even if that gives them some ammunition, well, now we're in the same boat.
Yeah. Yeah. So have there been times then in your guys' group, and, granted, we still have a few more months of this group,
Right.
But have you had times where there have just been those kind of vulnerable moments with each other that, you're not going to get this around the water cooler kind of times?
Yeah, I think pretty much everyone in the group has had at least one moment where they're either in tears or close to tears, and they're disclosing something that is deeply personal and not easy to talk about.
Can I ask how that feels for you? Like, how do you feel about that for yourself?
I don't like it. I don't like it. It's not what I'm comfortable with. It's certainly not what I'm used to. But I will say that when it's all said and done, and you talk about those things, and the group just extends grace, God's grace to you, and lets you know that you're still accepted and you're still loved and respected and all of those things. Boy, that feels really good.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. That I'm excited to see because the thing I know for a fact is that it was 8 years ago when I originally went through Genesis. And it's a lot to take in.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I sat down with my recovery mentor, Kathy Rodriguez, and interviewed with her, which I'll put a link in the show notes so that people can go back and listen to that if they'd like. It was in talking with Kathy that I was like, oh gosh, there are a lot of things about the Genesis process that I'd forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
But there were a lot of things that while I had consciously forgotten about them, I was still working on them. Like, even though I wasn't attaching it with, oh, this is a Genesis thing, it was something that I was, suddenly I had become aware of and attuned to and was,
It just got built into your thought patterns.
Yeah. And so the way I communicate with our children, the way I communicate with people who I'm in conflict with, the way I communicate with people who I want to try to understand, or, whatever. It's all really kind of goes back to this Genesis work. And so while it's been 8 years since I have originally done the work, in that 8 years, it's continued to work through me and in me. And so I'm excited to see. In fact, it was interesting today as we were going through this process. I was telling the ladies that in looking at my book from 8 years ago and where, what my answers are today, they're very different.
Oh, I bet.
And to see the progress that has been made is really fun because it's like, gosh, because I remember when I was first going through this thinking, I'll never be able to deal with this. How do I get from this point to a healthier position in life? I just couldn't see it. And here I am 8 years removed, looking back at it and going, dang, I've come a long way. And I know I still have like a million miles to go.
Well, we all do, but...
Right. But at least I know progress is being made.
Yeah.
And that's exciting.
And it's encouraging for me because, we're 3-4 months into this? Something like that. And I've made some revelations about myself and realized some of the things that, where some of those bad habits and things like that have come from. And so I have this tendency to think, okay, well, I've realized these things. It should be fixed now. I should be better. So it's nice to hear that, okay, this is not just an all right now thing.
Yeah.
It's going to continue to work in your life and is going to continue to work out change in you.
Yeah.
And so that's an encouraging thing.
Yeah. Well, and it's neat. By the way, I just did some math, and we've been in this for 5 months, and I think we have about 3 months to go, 2 or 3 months to go.
Okay.
It feels like we're never going to end, but we will.
Right.
But one of the things that's really neat too is that not only does this process give you tools for understanding how your childhood and your early relationships and your early experiences are playing into your current behavior, but it also gives you tools then for how to recognize different destructive thought patterns and for how to change those thought patterns so that you can begin to change the behavior, because it's easy to kind of do this fake it till you make it sort of approach to recovery. And you can do that to a point. And I guess some people can actually do that and be really pretty successful, at least on the surface. I think about people with, sheer willpower to quit smoking. That does happen. They just decide one day that they're going to quit smoking and they're done.
Yeah.
And that I do not understand. It took me like 17 attempts and a lot of like blood, sweat, and tears. It was really hard. Until I started to challenge my thinking. And once I started to allow my thinking to be changed around smoking and why do I smoke and what makes me a smoker and, all those things, then my behavior could change as well. And I think the same is true anytime we're talking about this kind of stuff, is that you might be able to change the surface behavior to a degree for a time, but for actual deep healing to begin, it has to come from somewhere deep inside of your brain and your heart. And if we don't allow God into those deepest recesses to really let the Holy Spirit begin to kind of clean those places out, then all we're doing is kind of giving lip service to a cleaner, healthier way of life. But we don't really know what that means. I don't know what my point was in all that. I got sidetracked, which is, I know, odd for anyone who has ever listened to me talk.
No, that never happens.
Rabbit trails? What are those? Anyway, one of the things, okay, so let me ask you this question.
Okay.
Is there a particular thing, and if this is too personal, then just tell me and, we'll edit it or whatever. Is there a particular thing in this process of Genesis that you feel like, I don't know, like it's just really connected, or like you can see like a marked change in your attitude or behavior or thinking or whatever?
I think I'm still too close to it. I don't have enough perspective yet.
Okay. That's fair.
I think on the other side of it, when I look back, I'll be able to nail down that thing. I know that there's things that have changed and shifted. I'm not yet sure where they're going to land.
Yeah.
It's still too fluid.
Yeah.
So, I'll be curious to see what happens. I'll be curious to see how it all sort of settles out.
Yeah. Yeah.
But at the moment, it's still too in process.
Yeah. Well, and man, if you guys are listening, if you're here, you're listening. As you're listening, sometimes I say things and I don't know. Anyway, so I would honestly never personally have recommended that we have couples in the Genesis process.
Oh man. Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, I've never heard of that happening before. I'm sure it probably has. And maybe other people are like, what's the big deal? It's not that big of a deal. In my mind, it's huge because it means you have two people who live together, who are potentially raising children together, who both potentially work outside of the home, who are busy individuals, then delving deep into their own heart and head and allowing God to kind of stir up the muck.
Yeah, it shakes things up. And yeah, we've seen that in the couples that are in the group, as well as in our own marriage. It can shake you up pretty hard. And unless you make a conscious effort of staying connected and really being patient in working through it together, it could potentially have things go the wrong way.
Yeah, for sure. And boy, I know that you and I've both been praying for for each of the couples in our group,
Mm-hmm.
and for the marriages, and I know that they have been praying for our marriages all as well. But man, you guys, listen, seriously, if you have an opportunity to be a part of a Genesis Process for Change group at a local church in your area, I would so strongly encourage you to do that. It is a commitment, it is a challenge, but it is also, it's life
It's
changing.
Yeah, it's eye-opening. And not
Mhm.
only does it allow you to see yourself clearer, not only does it hold up a mirror to things in your own life, but some of those people that just grate on you, that drive you nutty, it allows you to understand what's going on in them a little bit better as well.
Yeah.
And so that makes some of those interactions a little bit easier. It's easier to extend grace when you can recognize the hurt and broken places in someone else.
It really does. You know, there are people, we all have them in our lives that we come into contact with on a regular basis that just kind of get under your skin and
Mm-hmm.
kind of rub you the wrong way. But I think once you've kind of gone through this, then you can look at that person and go, oh, they're just a hurt, insecure little kid.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just their hurt, insecure little kid acting out in an adult insecure body.
Right.
And it looks pretty ugly. But if
Mm-hmm.
they were a 3-year-old, I would just hug them. You know, so maybe if they're an adult, maybe I don't hug them, but maybe I just extend some grace
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
show them some compassion. It definitely makes a difference.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so that's kind of, I guess that's kind of what we wanted to talk about a little bit, was just sort of what the show is going to be looking like in this coming, or from this point forward, unless God changes it or shuts our doors, you know, which either could happen, who knows. But we're going to just be focusing on our faith and mental health and how those kind of commingle and coexist, and how we can help each other through those difficulties and those life storms. And I wanted to talk a little bit about our process in leading Genesis groups and kind of what that looks like. And, you know.
Yeah. And not to give away too many things, but I know a little bit about some of the interviews that you've already done.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, you've got some fun material coming up, and it's going to be really exciting, I think.
I do.
Yeah, I think it's going to be important material for people, and something that needs to be talked about a little bit more. And so I'm glad that you're taking up that cause and
Mm-hmm.
Bringing it to people's attention.
Yeah. In fact, next week's episode is going to be all about the Super Bowl halftime show.
Oh dear.
And the empowerment of women.
All right.
So I'm so excited for this one. Yeah, I've been able to interview lots of people in the past few weeks, and I've got some more great interviews lined up, and I'm looking for other people to interview. And I just had a really great interview this morning with an author who I'm really excited to share with people. So yeah, just you guys, please come back next week. Check us out. See who it is that I'm going to be interviewing about women's empowerment. I think it's going to be really good. We're also going to be talking about the sex trafficking industry. So just as a little kind of warning, I suppose.
Right. Yeah.
But it's a really important conversation that she and I had, and I'm excited to share it with people. So I'm just so excited for the direction that things are headed. I'm excited to see where we're going to continue to go. I'm excited to see growth happen in our community here on the podcast. So friends, listen, if you know somebody who might benefit from this kind of a conversation, by all means, please share this podcast with them. You can subscribe on Google Play, Apple Podcast, Stitcher, all the pod players that play pods. You can download us there, find us there. So please subscribe, share with a friend. That's how we grow, is by your word of mouth. And we so appreciate you guys doing that. And I want to extend a very special thank you to those of you who have been sticking with me during this transitional season. I know it's been kind of a long time to just listen to me read Psalms every week, but I really appreciate the fact that you guys have done that. That's been awesome. And I hope to just bring you guys really great content in the future. And I hope that this is going to challenge and inspire and encourage and strengthen your hope in Jesus as we talk about these really, really important things and as we move together towards Christ. Matt, thank you so much for sitting down and chatting with me tonight.
Yeah, it was fun. Haven't done this in a while.
Yeah, it's been a long time, and I know we're both exhausted.
Yes.
And now, weirdly, I feel very revitalized and ready to take on another 3 hours worth of work. But I think we should probably turn out the lights and go to sleep.
Yes, I definitely should.
Yes.
4:30 is going to come far too early.
Far too early. All right, you guys, thank you so much for joining us. Have an amazing week. And remember, love God, love people, pray hard, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Oh, I forgot to give our website. Also, go check out our website, www.roadhometoyou.com. Okay, bye.